Welcome to the Uplift Effect podcast. This is Jill Falling. I am the host of this podcast. I am the owner of the Uplift Effect coaching and consulting business, and I am super thrilled to be here today to introduce to you yet another author. And I will tell you, the last few weeks have been a blessing to me to be able to speak to authors who are writing books to help you and me and to help us understand how to better pick our battles, how to better navigate this journey. And I just think that today's episode is super important. I'm going to introduce to you today Julie Igel. She is a certified classical homeopath. She is a wife. She is a mom of 3 now adult children, and she has a grandbaby on the way. And I will tell you, there is nothing sweeter than to talk to women who have journeyed the road just ahead of us. They've gone far enough that they have survived it. They can prove to you they've survived it. And they can also share wisdom that comes from no other way than having been down the road and saying, hey, you got to pick your battle. That might not be worth it in 5 years. And I enjoyed our conversation. I had to cut out a ton of it because it would have never fit. And yet I really want you to know about her book called My Socks. And when I saw this book, I knew that this was going to be near and dear to my heart, because this book is about her story with her child, but also many of us who have a child with sensory challenges, or otherwise known as sensory integration dysfunctions or sensory processing dysfunctions. And we talk a lot about that. We talk about real life practical stuff. And this is a gold mine today. You are getting a blessing. So let me get off of here, stop this introduction, and get going with our conversation with Julie Igel. Well, Julie, I am so thankful to have some of your time today and to talk to you about your newly released book. And I am just thrilled to death. So I am going to talk today with Julie. You guys are going to get to hear her story about her book called My Socks. And this is written by Julie Igel, and it is illustrated by Pearlie L. I am tickled pink about this. I have the actual book in my hands here, and the illustration is amazing. The story is amazing. And I am excited to introduce to you Julie Igel so you can hear why she wrote this book, how she originally wrote it, and it just got released this year, and hear her background story. And I think it will be a huge blessing for you moms that are listeners, and dads as well, as you hear her story and you can find your own story in the midst of hers as well. Okay, so Julie, tell us, how did this book come to be?
How it came. Well, first of all, thank you. First of all, just so great to have the connection that we got to meet each other online. So thank you so much for having me here today. So the way the book came together, I literally wrote that book. It's almost like I downloaded it. It was like this divine thing. I literally wrote it like in 15, 20 minutes. I just, and it actually was an actual event that took place. I mean, the story is a particular day that I had. It was real. It actually happened. And so I think that's why it came so quickly to me. I wrote it in sometime in the 90s, and I tried to publish it with some of the big publishing houses, Random House, Penguin, some of the big children's publishing companies. And I got the little nice, thank you, but thank you, no, thank you, And so I kind of shelved it. I tried a couple other times. I mean, when you publish a book, you're supposed to send it out to hundreds of people. But I just kind of got a little discouraged, and so I shelved it. And over the years, I would kind of take it out again and rewrite it a little bit, add a little stanza here and there, and then again, boom, I'd just shelve it. And then self-publishing started to become the thing. Now that we have so much access to different things online, I thought, okay, I'm going to get this out again. And I reached out to some friends of mine that are actual editors. They put me in touch with someone that could help me self-publish. And so I just decided to hire it done. And that really helped, instead of trying to do, I mean, you can get books that say, you know, self-publishing for dummies, but it was like this thick. I'm like, this will take me years. This is not what I do on a daily basis. I'm going to let somebody that does this, this is their job. And I'm so glad, because what would have taken me more years, I did in a few months. So it came out just right at the end of the year, right around Christmas. And so I'm working on marketing and all that kind of stuff. But I wrote it about my daughter. Well, I wrote it kind of, there's a little bit of all three of my daughters within this character. You know, as we were talking earlier, a lot of sensory issues. So my daughter, I mean, I knew right away when she was born that she was just very sensitive emotionally, very sensitive to her surroundings. I didn't have all the eating issues that we've talked about in the past with her. It was really textile things touching her, the grass, the wind. She still hates the wind. But the thing with the socks, things touching her. And it was difficult, you know, and it was really always a battle. And like I said, we live in San Diego. So it wasn't like I had to put a big coat on her and boots and all this clothes to send her outside for 10 minutes. You know, we live in San Diego, you know,
thank goodness.
They were always just in little sundresses. Yeah, thank goodness. So anyway, but she definitely, the sock thing was such an issue. And from what I understand, a lot of parents have this issue with socks. So maybe we're just really not meant to have anything on our feet to begin with. But, you know, those of you that live in cold areas in Michigan and Minnesota and North Dakota, I mean, how do people do that with all those clothes? You know, every day putting those clothes on can be quite the challenge. So,
yes.
Anyway, it was very divine moment when I came up with the idea of what to do with her, because she was complaining about her toes, you know, and the little ridge on the inside of the sock, and it was touching, and I mean, it just happened the way I wrote it in the book.
Yes,
and
which
from
is
that
genius.
moment on, I mean, from that moment on, she wore her socks. She would even wear them with her little jellies.
Oh,
so jellies were a big thing here in the 90s. Remember those?
Well, they're coming back.
Yeah, they're coming back. So anyway, and as a result of all of this, I found my way into holistic medicine. So, and as a result of that, I'm able to help other people with behavioral issues. So homeopathy which is what I do, can really help with all of these behavioral and sensory and, you know, all these types of issues, where I would try to explain that to my regular pediatrician, and it wasn't any kind of information that they could use. You know, it wasn't anything that it wasn't data that they could say, okay, now do this. But with homeopathy, I could tell my homeopath all these little strange idiosyncrasies about my child or about myself, and it led her to the right protocol. So, you know, again, we're kind of born how we come into, you know, we're born how we're born, you know, we come into the world how we are. And when I look back and I think about my daughter and the things that she used to do, I mean, always writing on the wall and tearing apart her drawers and moving things around and just constantly shuffling things and moving things. And she's a merchandiser now. She's an artist.
Oh.
And she's one of those and she's super organized. So she's one of those kind of people that go into your closet and go, and put everything in order. Very OCD. Everything's got, you know, and the color has to be this way. And, you know, she's an artist. So she sees things and she does things in such a way that, you know, it's pretty, I mean, I saw that in her as a toddler.
Isn't that crazy?
Toddler. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
So, yeah. And as we were saying earlier, it's I wanted to bring a little levity to the task of parenting. You know, we get caught up. We're so afraid we're going to damage them. We're, you know, of course, as moms, we worry about every little thing. And I was really blessed to have a very practical mother that always was telling me about picking my battles. Pick your battles, honey. Pick your battles, because that is not going to matter in a year from now.
Yes.
They're going to be fine. They're going to come out of this. Whatever happens today isn't necessarily how it's not set in stone, like this isn't going to affect them until they're, married or whatever, like so much of the things that we worry about don't end up happening. Right. I mean,
and we don't know, we can't see the forest for the trees on half of that.
Right. So a lot of times in my consultations, when I'm working with families, I'm really helping more the mom to support the mom or the dad, the parents, to help deal with this, because it's our response. Our children pick up on our anxiety. They pick up on our insecurity. They pick up on our fears. And if we're feeling all those things, a sensitive child who can feel the change of, my daughter can just sense any change of weather. I mean, it has to be perfectly 75 degrees, all the time. It's cold, it's hot, it's cold, it's hot. And she can sense things, so a child like that is going to pick up on a parent's anxiety, a parent's anger, a parent's, and again, not to make us as moms feel any worse than we already do, but because it's normal, it's natural, right? It's normal to feel this frustration when you have a child. You're just trying to get out the door and they're having a meltdown about not wanting to wear the blue shirt because they want to wear the yellow shirt, or or they don't want to wear any shirt.
And we're in a hurry. It's always in a hurry. And we're running late.
Right. What I also learned with this particular daughter, when she started preschool and had to pick out an outfit every day, that was just even more drama. My mom said, honey, give her 2 choices the night before. Give her 2 choices, put them on the bed. And in the morning, you got this and you got this. And then they feel in control. They feel like they have a choice. They've picked it. And, this is it.
Very good.
So again, boundaries. But, I think so much of what I was just saying before too, we get hung up on having everything being a certain way. We got to have it like this. Because that's what it means to be a good parent, because I got to do it this way, when that's not really necessary. You're in your home, this is your family, this is your time, this is your child. It's not the neighbor's child or your cousin's child or your sister's child. We get a lot of flack, right, from our own siblings.
That's right.
Telling us how to parent. And so you gotta, I wanted to support parents and let them know that, they're doing a good job.
Yes.
And find a little joy, find a little laughter at the end of the day.
And it's all going to be okay in the end.
It's all going to be fine. It's all good.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I wanted to say, well, there's a couple things that I wanted to say about your book. First of all, the book is about a little girl. And as on the back, you say, do you have a child that hates to wear socks? Then you'll love this book. Parents and kids with sensory challenges will enjoy reading this fun book together. You'll recognize the struggle and appreciate the surprisingly simple solution. And there's 2 things about that. One is there are a lot of parents, I see them in the Facebook groups, and they have children that are very young, and they are in the process of discovering that something is just a little different with this one child that they have. That is my story as well. It was my second child. And I know back in your time, they didn't have all of these official diagnoses, and right. Now they do, more so with some of these sensory types of things. But my son was diagnosed with a sensory integration dysfunction, or sometimes they call that a sensory integration dysregulation. And that simply means that for you listeners, that sensory wise in the brain neurologically, it's almost as if the sensations that we feel and recognize are almost reversed, and our body does not self-regulate, or their bodies do not self-regulate. For instance, they hear every little tiny drop of every little thing that drops on the floor in a classroom, whereas our brains have learned to regulate, self-regulate, and release that information. We hear it.
Filter all that out, right?
That's right. But we filter it out, and we don't need that information. Therefore, our brain does not bring it to our consciousness. Well, a lot of these children with sensory integration challenges, they do not have that component neurologically. They can learn to develop some of it, and they can learn to regulate some of it better. Early intervention is so important. And that is the thing that I wanted to be sure that I expressed, because it was the thing I did. I had to fight and fight and fight to get my child tested, because I knew something was not right early on. There were very big signs that something was off, and he was having meltdown after meltdown after meltdown, and very off sensory related things similar to your daughter. Clothing was a big issue. Anything that was tactile was very different than how I experienced it. Cotton balls would send him into outer space. I mean, he could not manage a cotton ball. He didn't like to be in the bath. Can you imagine? But he loved really sticky tape on his skin where you would take it on and off. He craved sensations of things that would make my skin irritated and bleed. He would take sharp pins and poke himself with sharp pins that he could find. We ended up, as I told you before, in a lot of therapies, which were unbelievably helpful. And we had a bristle brush, a thick, hard bristle brush that we would use to rub over his skin, directly on his skin, to help soothe him and calm him down so that he could go to sleep. I'm here to tell you that I tried that bristle brush on my skin, and it made me absolutely feel crazy, out of control and crazy. Yes, I could not have managed that, let alone find anything soothing in it. So oftentimes these children are nonverbal. They're delayed in their development because we learn intellectually and experientially, and their experiences are very, very challenged, and therefore they are often delayed developmentally. My son did not have sensation in his tongue, in his mouth, and whatever, and we had to learn sign language so that we could interact with him. And the day, I could almost cry talking about it, but the day we learned to be able to use sign language as a mom, to be able to talk to my child and communicate with him for the first time, when he is now 2 and 3 years old, for the first time ever, was like the heavens just opened up.
Right.
Because I had been fighting him ever since, because I couldn't understand why he wasn't understanding this, or why the cuddling wasn't soothing him when it did my first kid, and why he wanted everything so rough and tough, and why he was hurting himself. I'm like, what child beats his head on the tile floor till he's bleeding with a nosebleed, and he feels better?
Right.
How?
Well, that's a very common thing, that headbutting, and that's very common in kids with these sensory issues.
Yes. And I had no idea. So I suspect that there are moms that are very much where I was some years ago. My son is now 17 years old, and I suspect that there are moms that are where I was when my son was 13 months old, and 2 years old, and 3 years old, and they are feeling a lot of what I felt, a lot of what you felt. And one of my biggest concerns was, what is his life going to look like? How am I going to be able to interact with something that is so foreign to me? I had to first learn to understand it. But then what's genius about your book is it adds a little humor, and it also reminds us as parents that there is a solution to so many things that is just right up underneath our nose. It's just right there. And I won't give it away because I want people to read the book. It's a children's book. The illustrations are amazing, but it's fantastic. My son even read the book, and he laughed because he was like, oh, I so understand this.
I wanted kids to be able to see themselves in the story too.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not the only one that had, there's lots of me around out there.
There's lots of me. That's right. And it's called normalizing. Normalizing is so important because children need to understand that it's okay to be different. And parents need the freedom. This is something I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, is that what I know now is because I have a child who has had this, I see and feel the world so differently than I did before. I actually hear the birds chirping now in a way I never did before. My brain just processed that out. And my son would have a freak attack over the birds. Like, what is that? What's that noise? What's that noise? Everything was, what's that noise? This was once he was verbal. And I was like, I don't know. What is that noise? And I didn't learn to listen until I had him. I didn't learn to recognize that water actually has a really great feeling. I have the same story over the wind, just like your daughter. The ocean waves freaked him out. Anything that was a new thing sent us into orbit. But eventually, because of gradual exposure and therapy and early intervention, we began to gradually expose him to things and realize he didn't have to be afraid of it just because he had not experienced it before. He now loves the ocean. He now shows me how to love the ocean in a way I never could have before. And so it is a blessing to have children that see and feel the world differently, who have sensory challenges, because those sensory challenges teach us so much about the world that we forget.
Yeah, they do. Well, that we close out and we become even more. I mean, it's actually very concerning to me now because of all the electronics, because of kids spending so much time on the computer and on their devices, that they aren't getting out in nature, which is so healing and so good for the brain. And so it's like, I think it's just as important as that our parents who were never exposed to a lot of this stuff, because these symptoms are very common now in our world because of a lot of things like we talked about. You know, they didn't have to deal, you know, they didn't necessarily deal with it, or they just didn't deal with it. And then you know, then they ended up with other problems, you know, adults, grown children that felt abused or they weren't heard or disrespected, or, you know, all of those things. I hear all of these things in my practice because, you know, there was a one size fits all parenting style. And, and it's like, you finally get it figured out with one daughter or son, and then the next one comes along and they're totally different, and you can't parent the same way. You can't, you know, you've got to adjust, you know, you've got to, like, you know, think on your feet, and you just can't use one size fits all parenting. None of us are the same. None of us.
I thought very many times, my child's sensory issues are creating my sensory issues. Like, I am overstimulated, and we still have this issue now because he wants everything very loud. And I hear him. I always know if he's home or not, because the music is loud. He's loud. He talks loud. He just moves, walks loud. And if my house is quiet, I know he's not home. So I can hear him in the driveway. And I know just by the way he drives and his radio is, I know which child it is. And and I am overstimulated by all of that. But I have other children that are very much like me, and they can't handle all that noise, and they can't handle all that talking, and they needed things to be very different. And so we do have to parent very, very differently. And that is probably one of the most challenging parts of being a parent, is to figure out, if you have multiples, how to love and respect and embrace and develop every single different personality and characteristic traits, and let them
coming into your home.
Bloom.
Exactly.
That's right. Let them each bloom, and to water each of those in all these different ways. And my one kid who didn't like water, you know, he didn't want water. So, you know, I think that is a huge struggle for parents to figure out how to do that. But here's the good news is we can do it. You have
Right.
done it. Your daughters are doing amazing. I have 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl, and my children are doing incredible. This one child
Right.
specifically has an electric personality that people love being around. And when he was younger, my biggest goal for him was just to be regulated into a regular kindergarten classroom.
Right.
That was my biggest goal because he was so not functional. I had no idea that he would be able to blossom and bloom into this kind of a person that I see coming now.
Right.
And I think your book gives hope that not everything has to be a fight. We can pick our battles. We can
Right.
just change one little part of it. It makes all the difference in the world. And we can move on about our day and we don't have to
Right.
fight through everything. And Mama,
Right.
it's going to be okay.
As a parent, sorry goes a long way.
Oh, yes.
Goes a long way to apologize to your kids. And when you fall short of whatever and you lose your cool, because it's just part of being human. We're tired, we're exhausted, we have work, we have other things pulling at us. We have the child that doesn't get as much attention because this other child is taking so much attention. And so, just being able to say and acknowledge and say, I'm sorry, I didn't do so great today.
Yeah. You know what? That is a wonderful words of wisdom, I think, from parents who are farther down the road, that younger parents have to be reminded of. How do our children learn to apologize and to feel empathy and sorrow and sorry for things? It's because it was modeled.
Right. Because if you can't, right. And it also cuts that trauma that day. So that it almost doesn't impend on it doesn't like meld into their memory of this horrible emotional moment or time or day. If it's cut with an apology and a hug that helps to remove that trauma for the day. And for yourself too. And for kids to understand that, we're not perfect.
You know what? Because I think the thing is that if we expect ourselves to be perfect, they are going to feel that. They are going to sense that. And unfortunately, our voice becomes their inner voice. And then guess what we do? We make them into children who feel like they have to be perfect or else they're not loved.
To be loved and to be accepted. I know. And that's like what I said with you about sometimes with some clients that I have where they do these routines every day with their kids. And if they don't do this certain routine at a certain time every day, that that's their issue.
Yes.
It's their issue.
That's the parent issue. Yeah.
It's the parent's issue. And like I said, there were days my kids went to bed straight from the beach.
Saying in their hair.
Sand in their hair. So what? The next day I changed the sheets.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And I didn't wake them and force them to bathe and do their hair and make it all perfect. No, it was perfect. Just because they had to say where it was,
That's
and
right.
they learned that, that everything has to be perfect because how can we live in a world like that where everything, and that seems to be a huge struggle in this generation of time where we see so much there's so many things coming at us. We're influenced so much. In my day, it was just a magazine. We had a magazine. Now we have the internet and it's coming at us constantly. And depending on how much time we give to it, we're, all these different social platforms and blogs and we do this and we do that. And I actually started taking off some of these interior design blogs that I followed because I would see these images on my Instagram and just see these perfect homes.
Oh.
I used to be an interior designer. So I'm very, I was attracted to that, but then it just makes you feel, like, oh, I got, oh, my house is not looking perfect today,
Yeah.
That's just
like I'm not living up to that.
I'm not living up to this photo shoot, but the person's probably spent 12 hours creating.
The behind the scenes is a total chaotic wreck.
Yeah, behind the scenes. Yeah. So we really have to be on our guard, I think, especially as young moms. We just have to decide what we're going to let in and what we're going to let out. But, it's like, and other people's judgments, and maybe it's a family member, especially a mother-in-law that tells us how it is, and you should be doing this, and the should.
Yes, yes,
That's
that is some very, very good advice. And I know you are considering or thinking about, I hope you will, to write more books like this that address specific issues that children are facing, parents are facing, obviously, with them, to give some normalization to children, some humor to a situation, and for adults to realize that in the big scheme of things, the socks really weren't that big of a deal. They just really weren't. And I'm guilty of doing that. I think one time when we had talked earlier, I had mentioned my oldest child. I thought that he needed to go to daycare dressed just so. And I had a very sweet nurse at the hospital that I worked at say, now, Jill, let me tell you, you're going to need to pick your battles on this. Let him self-express at 3 and 4 years old, because that's not going to look real pretty at 15.
No.
And the best lesson ever learned is the one he learns on his own. So he wanted to wear cowboy boots, shorts, and a halter top to preschool in the middle of winter in Alabama. Now, I had a problem with his choice of attire, but and he still is very specific about how he dresses. He wants to be dressed a certain way. And I learned that by letting him doing that, instead of fighting it every day like we were, I let him do it. And you know what? He came home the very first day and said, I don't think I'm going to actually wear cowboy boots and shorts and a halter top to school anymore. The cowboy boots don't work out so great on the playground. It was really cold outside. And my halter top doesn't work out real well when you're upside down on the swing, And he never had the problem again.
Well, and some kids, they need that. Yeah, he learned it on his own because he felt it, he experienced it.
That's right.
And how much of that is our own embarrassment to send your child to school in,
I was guilty of that. That's exactly
absolutely. I told you my third child, she wore a bathing suit, this little cute little one-piece bathing suit for solid 2.5 years. Solid.
Yes, I love that story.
In the wintertime, she'd add a little sweater and her rubber and her rain boots, which again, remember, this is San Diego, so it's not like we have these torrential winters, but
yes,
we could have 45-degree days, and there she'd be in her little sweat and her little bathing suit. But third child, hello, that's what she wanted to wear. And
she turned out just fine.
Fine. She's 25 years old now. And
and she is not wearing a bathing suit every day to work.
But she was one of my ones that went to high school in clothes that I was like, try again. A little bit too scantily clad. And thankfully she was at the high school, even if it was a public high school, it was just like, no, they'd send girls home. Yeah, you're a little bit too much cleavage and go home.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me, Julie, and your book is excellent. I loved it. Much. I knew I was going to love it. I was, before I got the book, I knew I was going to love it. But then when I got the book, the illustration, the facial expressions, the illustrator has done an incredible job.
She did it. I can't say enough.
In your words, in the way that they come together, and the child can see themselves and the parent can see themselves, and a solution is found, and we move on. And I think that it's great. It's just enough funny. And I love it. So I want you to do some more. If you ever in need of content, you just let me know. I've got 4 kids. We got lots of content. And I just want to encourage the moms on here that it is not the end of the world. Our children very often, as Julie and I talked before we hit record, oftentimes these sensory issues come in a syndrome mix. And so, as was the case with me, and as is the case with a lot of people, there is also ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiant issues, and hyperacusis hearing, which my son had. Sounds like your daughter probably fit the criteria for that as well. And that was we had multiple things, and it was hard to know where one ended and where one began. And it was very challenging to navigate that. That is why I now operate and run the business that I run, where I do coaching for moms, called Transforming Chaos into Calm. I do that as a previous grief and trauma therapist. I use that background educationally, but I actually use so much more of my parenting journey and what I have learned from being a parent of multiples, as a single parent, and of a child that had a lot of extra special needs and needed some extra attention that required me to think differently. And so I help moms transform chaos into calm into their home to help save their relationships. And this book is a perfect example of why. I think moms, grandmothers, aunts, cousins, people who are buying gifts for families with children, but I also think therapists. As a therapist, I can tell you we are in need of books in our libraries to share and read with our children, to give resources to parents, to help normalize behaviors so that children do not feel like they are weird, because the world is going to do a good enough job of making sure that we all feel that way. Yes. And we want them to feel normalized, that they are not weird. They may have some things that are different, but that's okay. It makes them who they are. And we love that.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, of course. And the weirder, the better in some cases.
That's exactly right. Embrace our weird. That's okay. So I am excited to tell my therapist friends about this too, because I think it will be a great resource. And sometimes you just need a little book to lighten the mood in an office that you're sitting in. Yeah, that's right. So, well, Julie, that's right. That's exactly right. Because parenting is not easy, and it's hard sometimes to end the day with a smile.
It's hard to end the day with a smile, but it's important. Well, it's like they say to married couples, never go to bed angry. Well, that's not always easy to do, but it's true. And send your kids to bed with a smile. And
that's right.
It's heartbreaking. What I hear in my practice too, I had, people saying, my dad was never around, or I don't know what it's like to, have my father read me a bedtime story or something like that. It's heartbreaking, So
that's right. And I think sending our children off to school, that was a very challenging time for me emotionally, because I realized for quite some time I would holler at my kids. I would holler at my kids all the way to school because I was frustrated. And there's no reason for that. So I would send them off to school, and the last thing they heard from me was fussing. And thankfully it wasn't fussing and cussing, but it was fussing. And I cussed once they got out, but I'm just kidding. But that's true. We want to leave them with hugs and loves, and to know that we are their greatest advocate.
Right.
And we love them just the way they are. We love them because of who they are. And it may be frustrating and it may be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And I have learned so much from my son because of who he is, as well as all of my kids.
Yes, all of them. Yeah. No,
they make us better. I am who I am. Well,
and there's the idea that they come to teach us our lessons that we need to learn too. So
that I absolutely believe that. That is exactly right.
Our own egos, putting our own egos aside, and So learning those lessons. But again, I just think the biggest thing is just pick your battles, and it's the things that you think are so like this is the line in the sand, when maybe you need to move the line in the sand. Or
in 10 years from now, is that going to really be the most important thing? Because there are things that you are going to have to actually pick.
Right exactly.
You can't pick all 25 of them.
You can't all pick all 25
and have a happy home.
No.
That's right. Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate you talking to me, and job well done.
Thank you so much. So that means a lot to me, coming from someone like you that's been through what you've been through. So that means a lot. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, there you have my conversation with Julie. I know that you have been blessed by that. I was blessed by the time that I got to spend with her, and I want to be sure that you know how to contact her and how to order her book. It is on Amazon, My Socks, but I will put it in the show notes. You can link. The link will be there. You can also find her on the social media sites by her name, Julie Igel. It's Igel. She also has a website. She is a certified classical homeopath, as I mentioned, and her website is homeopathicsolutions.com, spelled SOULUTIONS. So I will put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to the Uplift Effect podcast. All my contact information will also be in the show notes. And I look forward to talking to you again next Monday. Have a great day. Bye-bye.